Hello kids, it's Mr. Agee here, and we are getting ready to kick off a poetry adventure. And for those of you who've been paying attention, I've said it several times, I absolutely love poetry. I love teaching poetry. I love watching students get new information about poetry. And one of my favorite books about poetry is this book here that you're looking at called A Kick in the Head, an everyday guide to poetic forms. As we work through this poetry unit, you'll see that I really like the nuts and bolts of poetry. I really like sort of the puzzle of syllables, syllable counting, and making sure rhythms are what they're supposed to be, and that studying rhyme, things like that. But I like how poetry can exist in so many different forms. And when we talk about forms, sometimes we're just talking about the shape of it, like what it actually looks like on the paper. Poetry undeniably is different from the regular kind of sentence writing that you do when you write letters or you write stories. Now, there is a type of story poem called an epic poem, which we will get to, but I like to go through this book here just to teach some of those basic elements of poetry. And it just so happens that it's illustrated by one of my favorite children's book authors and illustrators, Chris Roshka. This is an anthology, which is a kind of a collection of things. And Paul Janeshko, you see here, Paul Janeshko is an anthologist. What he does is he collects things and puts them into books. And so here he's collected a variety of poetic forms to teach us about them. So I'm going to use this book to kind of kick us off with A Kick in the Head, an everyday guide to poetic forms, written by or collected by Paul B. Janeshko and illustrated by Chris Roshka. On the inside cover, it's got an acrostic poem, which is one of the forms we'll study. And you can see down the side here, it's got poetic forms. And as I zoom in, I can see here that poetic form, I can see it a little bit better. Please open this book for something extraordinary. 29 poetic forms await you. Inside these pages, how many can you master? From sonnets to double dactyls, odes to limericks, Roshka and Janeshko and a frisky mule make learning the rules of poetry so much fun. All right, so you heard the word rules, and there are poetic forms or types of poetry where there are no real rules, and so some poems, some poetic forms do have rules, and some don't. And that's part of the joy for me, is helping kids understand the rules of different types of poetic forms. So moving back to, let's see if I can get this back here. Yep. All right. And this is the title page, A Kick in the Head. And you can see they've got sort of a collected, like a crossword type, Paul B. Janeshko and Chris Roshka. These are all of the different types of poetic forms in this book. So this is the table of contents. The introduction is next, followed by the one that we'll study today, a couplet. A couplet is the basic two-line building block of poetry. And then we get into tercets and quatrains and haikus and senryus and tankas, cinquains, Clara Hughes limericks. That's about where we'll stop. We might pick and choose a few more, especially for those of you who get really, really interested in the form aspect of poetry. But remember, we're in an expression unit. So you never forget that writing in itself is a form of expression, and poetry is an artistic form of expression that, in this case, we're going to learn about the many different rules of different poetic forms. So we're going to get into some of these and dig into them, and I'm going to ask you to actually create some of them, even today. In the intro, why, you may ask, do poems have rules? Why 17 syllables in a haiku? Why 14 lines in a sonnet? The answer is, rules make the writing of a poem more challenging, more exciting. Think of a game you enjoy, like baseball. Imagine how much less intriguing the game would be if there were no foul lines or no limit to the number of outs in an inning. The rules often ask, can you do a good job within these limits? Knowing the rules makes poetry, like sports, more fun for players and spectators alike. Robert Frost once remarked that poetry without rules would be like a tennis match without a net. That said, in this book of 29 poetic forms, not all the examples strictly follow the rules of their form. Don't be shocked. Poets are sometimes more interested in following the spirit of poetic form than being a slave to its every aspect. For example, when you read Stephen Herrick's limerick on page 21, you'll notice immediately that he breaks the rules and has fun doing so. Likewise, although the excerpt from Robert Service's ballad, The Shooting of Dan McGrew, follows the basic ballad rhyme scheme, it is not written in quatrains, stanzas, or verses of 4 lines. In a handful of explanations of the forms, I mention rhyme scheme and say something like, the rhyme scheme in this stanza is ABBA. Using letters in this way tells the readers which lines rhyme. In my example, ABBA, I'm telling you that the first line rhymes with the fourth line, and the second line rhymes with the third. We will get into that more as we study. Don't overlook the clever pictorial clues that Chris Roshka has included in the top corner of each page where a new poem is introduced. For example, the flowers on page 14 represent the 575 syllable count and arrangement of a haiku, as well as its natural subject matter. You can read this book any way you wish, of course, but let me offer a suggestion. Read a poem, then read the explanatory note at the bottom of the page. You'll find fuller explanations on pages 56 through 59. Then read the poem another time or two to see if you can tell how it follows or departs from the aspects of that particular poetic form. No matter how you read this book, though, be patient with the forms and enjoy the poems. Enough for me. It's time to hear what the poets have to say. Paul B. Janeshko. So in an anthology, the words that you're getting ready to see are not written by Paul Janeshko. I think he does have a couple of his own creations, but he's collected examples of each form from other poets. And that's what an anthologist does. So the very first one we're going to talk about today is the couplet. Okay, so you can see that this pictorial clue that Chris Roshka put up here, the couplet. Couple, if you've heard the word, means two. So you see the two birds on the limb here, and you see a mule in the picture. And the form is very, very simple. It's 2 lines. They usually rhyme. They usually have an ending rhyme, and that's it. A couplet is a poem or a part of a poem that's just 2 lines that rhyme most of the time. In the world of mules, there are no rules. So see how he broke it up? Line 1 ends with mules. Line 2 ends with rules. And what exactly does he mean by that? Well, we're not so sure, and sometimes meaning isn't exactly what we're supposed to get from poems. Maybe he wants us to consider the nature of the mule. And if you did a little research on mules, you'd know that they can be very stubborn. Also, there's a specific way that mules are born that's very interesting, but I'm not exactly sure what it means, but that's not necessarily the point of this. The point of this is to see that this is a poem written in a couplet form. So it's 2 lines, and the end of each line rhymes. In the world of mules rhymes with there are no rules. Rules, mules and rules. This would be an AA rhyme scheme. That's how you refer to the rhyming pattern in any poem, is with the letters. A is the first line, and any line that rhymes with that first line would also be labeled as A. The next line that doesn't rhyme with the first line is B. There are no B's in this one. It's AA. That's it. And the poem title is The Mule by Ogden Nash. And I'll zoom in here so you can see down here. There on each page in very small print, there is written a definition of the form. A couplet is a 2-line poem or stanza, usually rhyming. All right, so that's enough reading for today. It's enough on me. I'm going to tell you the assignment that I'm giving the students in the class. Use the remaining time you have for writing today in your writing notebook, not on your computer, in your writing notebook. Create as many couplets as you possibly can. So it's 2 lines that rhyme. That's all. And so in the classroom here, we're going to have a couplet writing competition, and we're just going to see how many couplets you guys can come up with, and I'm going to participate too, and then we're going to share out at the end. So do your best and have some fun, and enjoy the beginning of our poetry studies, working on that basic building block of poems, the couplet, 2 lines that have ending rhyme. Enjoy.